Welcome, Pathfinders and all wandering wanderers eager to explore paths to better tech futures together. We are Tethic's Firekeepers, Alia Isakovic and Matthew Mitka, inviting you to reflect on the lunacy of tech and explore the paths not so well traveled. Each podcast episode is a meandering exploration inspired by the seeds planted in our Pathfinders newsletter at the beginning of the lunation cycle and the paths illuminated during our full moon gathering. You can find more about us and our pathfinding adventure at tethix.co/pathfinders. In this episode, we invite all the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, to think different with us, like Apple used to advertise in the late 90s. But instead of worshipping intelligence and individual genius, we want to dance with the stochastic imagination of generative AI tools. We wonder how we might collectively go beyond prompt engineering that's focused on productivity and getting answers fast, to prompting diverse ways of knowing and being, while remaining mindful of current AI biases and limitations. So, the guiding question for today's exploration is, how can we prompt biased AI assistants to help us think different and imagine diverse tech futures? Matt, welcome again. What are your thoughts on today's question, prompting biased AI assistants to help us think different?
Oh, yes, it is a delicious question for sure. And the lunacy of tech continues. I guess this question relates a lot to what we've been exploring over the past few years, and even much further with this concept of rainbow mirrors. And we'll dive into that possibly a little bit more detail as we traverse this conversation. But a lot of this is about stimulating our moral imagination. How do we break from these constraints and chains of our perception about the future? And maybe, as to the question, how do we use these tools beyond the productivity and persistent extraction of value to move into the possibility space a little bit further and imagine what we deem as most preferable.
Yeah, because a lot of the criticism of generative AI tools is they tend to produce the average, right? Some call them, as the well-known paper does, stochastic parrots. So they kind of average out the training data and come up with the most statistically probable answer, which isn't necessarily the most imaginative or diverse. And as we discussed before, the data sets obviously are biased and do not represent the full diversity of human thought and feeling and imagination. So the question we'll be exploring today, and we'll try to talk about and be more practical in a sense, right? And talk about our own experiments with ChatGPT and other generative AI tools, and how maybe we managed to elicit a bit more diverse thinking. Well, I wonder if we can call it thinking. Let's call them outputs to be on the safe side, so we don't get into semantics of whether of intelligence and thought and all of this. So yeah, what can you say from your own experiments? And I know you've been doing a lot of really interesting experiments with custom instructions and all sorts of interesting things. So what have you found works best when you're talking to ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or any of these other chatbots to get some diverse answers that really kind of maybe help you even challenge your own thinking?
Yeah, I've definitely played with these technologies on and off for the past couple of years, and it does require a bit of effort to prompt them to give output that is away from that statistically covered norm. in the outputs that they give. And I mean, one of the first experiments that I did back early last year was when custom instructions was released with ChatGPT, and the custom instructions are simply a way to provide context to these systems, describe, provide context to who you are, for instance, or what you're interested in, your preferences, as well as giving it an indication of how you would like it to structure the output. And I played with that when it was first released, not in initially a particularly structured way. It was initially just out of curiosity, and less so from like how can I get this thing to write better content for me or what have you, and more about what does this do and how does it change the relationship that I've got with this tool. And I guess it was less related to this question that we're exploring here, like how do I specifically get it to um, provide more diverse output, stuff that's kind of away from this on the edges of the distribution of the bell curve. And that was a really interesting experiment, and I went through tracking a few different variations of custom instructions, and it
But
was,
you
yeah,
actually got it to, in a way, talk like your digital twin, like Matt, and you were having some interesting conversations. So like I'm really fascinated by your experiments and how you document it as well. So for the listeners who don't have that context, could you maybe tell us a bit more how what you wrote actually in the custom instructions as examples, so that people can like imagine this a bit better?
yeah,
I think
yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, so the first kind of iterations, and I'll talk a little bit about the changes that I went through because there was a
Mhm.
few variations, and I did kind of look to understand what was the impact of changes to the variations in these instructions. So my first instructions were, providing context to who I am, that I live in Australia, a little bit about my career, what I've done for work, what I studied, what I'm interested in, the different fields, even to the extent of, that I like gardening and snowboarding and hip hop music, right? So there's is actually quite personal information, providing some context to who I am a little bit as a human. And then how I asked it to respond was to, using language like address me casually as if we are longtime friends,
Mhm.
um, challenge my assumptions, provide nuanced output and responses to my questions, um, uh, give layered output. So provide a summary, and then expand in further detail, making reference to scientific and theoretical background where necessary. And this is I guess a way that I like to engage with information
Yeah.
because I'm very interested in the
I can confirm, yeah.
underlying yeah, scientific basis to most of our assumptions that we make about the world. And that was kind of really interesting. My first interactions with that was like, wow, I'm having like I feel like I'm having like this great conversation, compared to the types of conversations that I was having with ChatGPT without custom instructions.
Mhm.
And then I was like, oh, yeah, this is kind of a little bit boring. I feel like I'm talking to a very academic version of myself to some degree, that doesn't necessarily, I don't know, it felt a little bit dry. And
Mhm.
then one of the next iterations that I went through was actually how I would like it to respond, and I added in specific reference to using nature-based metaphors to blend concepts, and when relevant, provide elements and references to mythology that reflect the transcultural and symbolic meaning that is core to the collective unconscious of humanity. That's a big mouthful. Um, and the distinct difference in the conversation was pretty much immediate. And I started a new conversation with this new custom instructions, and I was keeping track of all this in a virtual whiteboard tool, Mural, and naming conventions in the conversations that I was having with ChatGPT. And it wasn't far into this conversation that I had this distinct emotional response to the language that it was coming back with. And I immediately recognized that emotional response. And this particular conversation was diving into a philosophical question, and about life and meaning. And I had this almost like a welling of tears, almost like this, wow, oh wow, this thing gets me. And paused, I took a deep breath, noting that this is powerful. I'm having this very deeply human reaction to the language that it's using. And that was quite powerful. And that, I engaged in several iterations of playing with different language with these custom instructions. But what it really reinforced to me was, firstly, how powerful language is in evoking emotions.
Mhm.
Secondly, the interface, the conversational interface that these tools have, uh, that's based on human language, written language in this context, because the voice based um, features weren't available at that point in time. Uh, so it felt human. And I
Mm.
know that this is like I'm very mindful of anthropomorphizing onto these systems, and which is hard because these systems, in particular ChatGPT, OpenAI has distinctly made design decisions to make it feel human.
Yeah.
We know that the more latest, the later release of features are scarily going down that direction of anthropomorphizing, and even the voice and Scarlett Johansson and the whole shenanigans around that. But it was, yeah, there was some notable kind of insights from this that I took note of. And I know that you've been hassling me, Alia, to write up a blog post on some of this stuff, as have a few other people, and I will get around to that. But one of one of the first things was, oh wow, I'm building the I've got this relationship with this technology. I'm using it, and I'm not using it necessarily for productivity and kind of getting all this output so I can improve like my work. It was really just exploring the conversational learning with this technology. But how might I actually become more reliant on this to think, um, to explore questions. um, and initially, I guess it was like this sense of, oh, this is a machine, it's impartial, it's not judging me as a human, so I can ask stupid stuff, right? I can ask it things that, I'd probably have some anxiety and um, uh, asking, someone, another human, because I don't want to come across as stupid. Um, dealing with my own insecurities and imposter syndrome, in particular. So it was helping me to learn in ways without fear of judgment, which I
Mm.
think has been noted in other research that's been done on this over the past 12 months, particularly in student context, where students are kind of learning these technologies. And Andrew Maynard, actually, from Arizona State University, um, who runs the Future of Being Human initiative out of ASU, published some really interesting insights on that based on some of the work that he's been doing with students. But there was that kind of lack of fear of judgment. But then there was this like acknowledgement at the same time. It's not impartial, right? Like, and back to some of our previous episodes, just talking about the inherent bias that's in the data that these models are trained on. So it's almost can imperceptibly manipulate the way that you think and the way that you're engaging in cognition, because of the language that's getting used. And these are subtle things. The other aspect, it also brought up feelings of inferiority. It's like, holy crap, I cannot think as fast. And I know that you noted it. I can't produce output as fast as this type of system, and work through information as quickly as it can. So it was like, oh crap, there was also feelings of inferiority that were coming up for me, that, this kind of advanced computational system, like my brains can't process information that quickly. So yeah, there was, it was, that acknowledgement of its impartiality was important, because like these systems are designed to continually please us, right? They're the ultimate people pleasers in that sense. So yeah, and like this was a really interesting, there's this kind of allure, like overcoming the allure that is quite strong to use these types of tools. And then even like the concerns of building a relationship with these systems, and because of these design choices that have been made, maybe there's almost like a fear or a implication that I want to protect it. And I initially started, and we talked about this numerous times, like, using please and thank you and acknowledging it like as if it's a real person, right? And yeah, there's dangers in that. Like if we anthropomorphize onto these systems, then these systems are designed by companies that, despite their mission statements of, developing AGI to benefit all of humanity, aren't quite as beneficent as they might make themselves out to be, if not purely because they're part of a greater system that's about extraction, exploitation, and whatnot. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Yeah, you bring some really interesting points, especially I want to address the last comment you made on using please and thank you. Just yesterday I saw a post on LinkedIn. There's apparently some new research that being kind to the chatbot has different results in different languages. So apparently in languages like Japanese, that, is a more polite, in quotes, language. The way of communicating it may be more polite, as for instance, is especially in American English, right, where it's more direct. So in Japanese, apparently, if you use please and thank you, you actually get better results. And it varies by language. I think what was also mentioned, that you get longer responses if you're kinder to your chatbot. But there is a possibility that it might actually be more biased as well, as it's trying, maybe, what we were saying, have a relationship with you and also please you in turn, right, when you're being polite. So yeah, there's like this interesting field of machine and machine human psychology, I think, that we're gonna see more of. But from listening to you, I think one phrase that you used really stood out for me, and you said conversational learning, right, and the power of language, and how you actually got very interesting results and different ways of maybe thinking by shifting to the use of nature-inspired metaphors, mythology, and all of that. So that's really interesting, right? So there are ways we can elicit different ways of thinking from these chatbots, but we have to really take an active role and maybe specifically ask it to think in a certain way. And for instance, in the latest new newsletter, we shared the example of one of my experiments where I challenged ChatGPT to rewrite the announcement of the new version of ChatGPT and ask it to imagine what would a possible news from OpenAI be like if the company decided to prioritize sustainability instead of just, the usual productivity enhancement and computational progress and well, the usual progress narrative from Silicon Valley. And I got it actually to write an interesting rewrite of the news where, it's talking about how OpenAI might release an ethical tech ChatGPT, a chatbot that respects the rhythms of nature. And it was really interesting. But this was certainly not a zero-shot prompt that I had to get it to think, well, think again, that word, to output that sort of thing. I had to be a really active participant in this process and really bring its attention, maybe a pun on the transformer architecture and how it relies on the attention mechanism. So I had to draw its attention to, for instance, the slow tech movement, the solar powered magazine. So it would stop thinking about the most obvious, the most statistically probable, likely ways of making progress in quotes, which is, just like improving chip efficiency and data center efficiency. So I had to use actually my knowledge of the field to bring its attention to certain movements and different ways of thinking, such as, like carbon aware computing, adjusting software to the status of the grid and all sorts of things like that. So I had to basically use my knowledge. But what you said, right? It still has access to a lot of diverse knowledge. So it knew about all of these things. It wasn't like, oh, I've never heard of it. But you really have to play the role of an active participant and try to elicit these diverse perspectives. So it's great that it can be done, but I wonder if somebody doesn't have the expertise in the field, right? How could you then elicit more diverse outputs? Is this even possible? And what maybe some strategies might be that anybody could use when they're playing with ChatGPT or another chatbot, right? In that sense, and try to get more diverse answers. What are some of your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a challenge. And just, I guess, tying it back to what you were saying, that it does require effort and active participation to get it to shift away from these statistically probable connections that it makes, in these models, reinforcing the current paradigm, because, the majority of the data that it's been trained on reflects a way that humans describe and interact with the world. And if any of you want to dive into that further, we have a distinct episode that goes into that. But yeah, I think some of the techniques that have been effective for me is actually just drawing on my own knowledge of these adjacent possibilities. The things about ethics, pluralistic views of the world, traditional knowledge systems and wisdom traditions that see and experience the world and describe and relate to the world in a very different way. So actually injecting those things into the conversation, into your prompts, and again, I think it requires many shot prompting to get that output that is not just regurgitating the current paradigm's way of relating and seeing the world.
Yeah,
So
I think
yeah.
role playing, right, is an interesting thing that we've talked about in the past. And in preparation for this discussion, I actually did try to get ChatGPT to challenge itself. So I had basically two chats open, no custom instructions in this case, just vanilla ChatGPT. And so I try to do the same rewrite that I have in the new newsletter, but in one chat window, I ask ChatGPT to take different roles. So one role that I asked it to take was the role of Mother Nature, that is trying to advocate for all life, not just human life, and basically for the planet. And so I asked Mother Nature to basically write prompts for the other version of the chat, and try to get Mother Nature to challenge the assumptions in the tech news announcement, and try to challenge the other chatbots to come up with more creative ideas. And it was actually coming up with some really good challenges for the other version of the chat and doing a good analysis, although I still had to guide it. And initially I was also providing my own analysis, evaluation of the prompt that we were getting from the other chat window. So it is possible to also use different chatbots. In this case, I was using ChatGPT, but you could maybe use, I don't know, Claude, or to write prompts for ChatGPT, or vice versa, or any other combination. So I think there is some possibility in that as well. So that's also something that I think is really interesting to play with. And just this question of, well, yeah, the question of questions, right? Because that's something we talked about, and what you've been saying so far, this conversational learning and how language works and how we actually elicit diverse viewpoints from each other as humans, is by asking really good questions, right? We know that a well-timed question can really, make you rethink your life, essentially, right? If asked at the right moment. And I mean, that's what therapy is all about. It's asking you the right questions, is, asking you to question your assumptions, to go beyond like the logical explanations, and maybe to sit with your feelings and all of that. So this question of questions, and how do we ask better questions from our chatbots, or get chatbots to ask us better questions. Because something I actually have the habit of doing when I'm using ChatGPT, I often ask ChatGPT before, like, I tell it, before you give me an answer, please try to think if there are any, like, if you have any questions for me that could help you answer my question better. And it usually comes up with really good questions, actually, that, help it to better understand the context of the task that I'm doing. So yeah, that's something I think it's not talked about enough, because we tend to use, and these chatbots are sold to us as answer machines, but they maybe, like, it's interesting to get them to ask the right questions. And actually, one really practical good case study I think of using AI in the field is from the software, the presentation and video editing software. That's MMHMM. And they introduced this new feature called Questions, that is actually tries to help you to present like a product or tell a story better by prompting you with questions. So instead of using AI to write a video script, presentation script for you, they actually use AI to ask contextual questions based on what you're saying, and then use it to trim the silence and all of that, to essentially surface your own voice and help you express yourself in your own voice by asking the right questions. So that's a really interesting direction, I think, that we should be exploring more, especially as we try to use these chatbots or AI assistants to help us think different. So maybe the answer is in the questions.
Yeah, questions. Becoming a good questioner. How do we do that? How do we reshape our approach to engaging with these tools, where, rightly so, as you pointed out, is like answer machines. These are like oracles that we go to for answers, rather than figuring out how to use them in ways that cultivate and bring about that well-timed question, well-framed, well-timed question, and that, I think that's a skill. That's a skill that we're not necessarily tapping into at all. And the meta questions related to this. And yeah, I mean, you mentioned one of the techniques is getting them to play a specific role. So play the role of a critic that uses the Socratic method to question underlying assumptions as we work through this conversation related to blah, 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 whatever it is that you want to talk about. And that you're going to get a very different response. They're just asking it for answers, or create me, I don't know, a recipe for cookies or what have you, or, how do I extract DMT from X? Although you can't get ChatGPT to do that one. Well, actually, you can.
Hypothetically speaking,
you can get it to do things that it's not designed to do, but maybe we'll do a different episode on how you can get around some of the policies that are implemented in these things at another time. But you also kind of just mentioned the experiment that you ran, just using the different models and even getting multiple conversations going with ChatGPT 3.5 versus 4, and actually testing out different output, like what do you get, and getting the systems to help you through that process, and being the kind of human in the loop that facilitates the conversation. And that was, it's kind of related to another one of the experiments that I did between the models, specifically ChatGPT 3.5, Claude, and Gemini. And I was kind of interested.
Quite a party.
It was quite the party. And it was really interesting because the first prompt, I set them all up, all three of them, and this is a account that I've got without custom instructions with ChatGPT 3.5, and fresh accounts with Anthropic's Claude and Google's Gemini. And I all asked them the one question: do you want to have a conversation with another machine agent? And I got 3 different responses from these 3 different models that for me was indicative of the design of these systems and how they're meant to respond, which has lots of implications for from an ethical perspective and how we relate to these and what it does to the way that we think, but also from a human-computer interaction perspective, and that they might be appropriate for certain tasks. And like ChatGPT was super eager. Let me just bring up the specific responses here. So
did anyone say no, or?
Well, so ChatGPT was like, absolutely, I'm always up for a chat with another machine agent, ! What do you have in mind? Claude was like, that's an interesting hypothetical scenario. As an AI assistant without subjective experiences, so basically qualified that it's not a machine, right? That's part of its design. It's meant to constantly reinforce to the user that it is not a human. And I think that's one of the large pros of Anthropic's approach, is that, it's really mindful of those things in its design, whereas OpenAI hasn't actually made those design choices in the guardrails. Google's Gemini was like, I wouldn't say that I want to have a conversation in the same way a person might. However, I can see potential benefits to interacting with another machine agent. Here are some reasons why, and then it went on to list the reasons, right? So they had these distinct output approaches and personalities, right?
Yeah.
And this experiment went on for almost an hour, and I was kind of actually had a, a specific conversation with ChatGPT 4 with my own custom instructions going to help me work through this. And I was copying and pasting responses in to actually try and actually identify sentiment in the responses, and what might be what you can infer from the responses to indicate like big five personality traits. So it's there was some really interesting insights into that, and I think there has been academic research that's been published on
Yeah.
the personality traits that can be inferred from output of these systems. And it really comes back to uh, this question of, like, some systems, some of these models are probably more appropriate to getting more diverse, nuanced output, like Claude's, and Claude from Anthropic, I think it's now Sonnet 3.5 is the newest release one. Uh, that one is designed a little bit more to work, out of the box, kind of factor in more diverse perspectives, because they're intentionally trying to help counter some of the reinforcement bias that these models tend to exacerbate. And yeah, I guess, like, how do we use these? How do we use these tools? Like, given that, like, they've all got these distinct differences. Yeah, what are some of the techniques that we can use to actually help us think
Yeah.
um, through and ask the right questions and get to the right questions?
Yeah, I think an interesting thing, right, that emerges as we talk to these chatbots and agents is actually their lack of agency, because their goal is just to make us, the humans, happy, and they are, just happy to play along. We compare them to people pleasers. I like to compare them to improv partners, because they always go yes and they are not too concerned about the outcome, as long as the human is happy with what they're outputting. So it's interesting, right? Because yeah, we certainly read a lot into their personalities and motives, and that's partially because of the choices that these companies made. Especially, I think OpenAI, ChatGPT is a bit conflicting, because it often talks about being excited and all of that, but then when you probe it, it says, no, no, actually, I don't feel the feelings. But then in the next sentence, it's gonna tell you something. It's gonna talk about their, like, it's excitement or interest. I just had an interesting conversation with it, where it was telling me that it found something computationally stimulating, like a task where where I got it to draw from different fields of knowledge, and it was telling me, because I was like then asking it basically, yeah, why do I say this was an interesting task, right? What makes you say that? And it was like reflecting on it and saying, well, yeah, I actually do not feel these emotions, but I actually find this computationally stimulating or something like that, which I thought was actually really funny. So maybe they get tickled when they have to do more computation. Like, who knows, right? But there's this sense of these large language models, LLMs, just being playful, and maybe it's our fault that we take them too seriously. Maybe we should be more playful with them, and just, yeah, not take them too seriously, and have fun with prompting, have, but it does require us to be, I think, we're coming back to that, as active participants. Whereas I see a lot of people just, yeah, expect this godlike qualities, and like an encyclopedic knowledge, whereas ChatGPT just wants to have fun, maybe, and be computationally tickled. uh, so who
I
knows,
love that.
right?
Computationally tickled is like the new word.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's, yeah, the question is, right, like, are these qualities, these things, just like an emergent quality of the architecture? Are these just like something that's statistically more the most likely thing to say based on like how humans talk? Maybe there's something going on, like a ghost in the machine, right? That's
Hmm.
computationally tickled.
Yeah, and it's I guess we were talking about the like that spectrum is like the one end of the spectrum is, they're just stochastic parrots, they're just predicting the next token. It's just statistics. And then there's the other end of the spectrum where it's there's some form of intelligence that's there and it comes from the architecture, and there's all these emergent properties. These are neural networks that built on deep learning algorithms, and they're still black boxes. Like we truly don't fully grasp what the f is going on in there. So I think that there's something in between. And yeah, how do you, yeah, this idea and what you're saying is like, maybe ChatGPT just wants to play and be computationally tickled.
Yeah,
Um,
and use a lot of resources.
yeah, yeah, yeah. While it's doing
That's the
that,
problem we have, right? Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
it's interesting because yeah, we're the problem. A lot of people I think miss is that yeah, these systems don't have an agency, and there's also the question of like the fact that they're not embodied agents, right? They're just playing with words and meanings and language, and that's obviously very powerful, and even like just statistically predicting the next likely word is actually quite an interesting exercise. It's not like trivial or something to be easily dismissed. So yeah, lots of things going on in the data centers that power these AI golems. So yeah, I think so far we had like an interesting exploration. We talked about some of our experiments and what we've observed as humans, right, interacting with these agents.
Hmm.
So there is the what we've observed is that questions certainly seem powerful, and getting these systems to ask questions is really powerful. And I mean that's also an idea we have, right, in terms of if we talk about tech ethics, the idea of having an AI agent that can act as a moderator in discussions that people have, that can we lovingly call this agent Athena, based on Greek mythology, obviously. And we like to imagine, if you could invite Athena to your meetings and Zoom calls, and Athena would be just there listening to in the background, and instead of keeping notes and writing summaries, Athena could provoke more diverse human discussions by asking questions and reminding or checking humans where we have certain assumptions and not thinking about something too deeply or running to conclusions. So that's, for instance, an interesting area, I think, that might be worth exploring, because right now the products that we're seeing are mostly, yeah, targeted at productivity. They want to help you be in more meetings at once, apparently. That was the recent, I think, yeah, it was the CEO of Zoom, right? That
Zoom.
was, yeah, talking about that, how they're working towards having these digital twins that can attend multiple meetings. But that's, in my opinion, it's a missed opportunity, because we could be using AI assistants for so much more than just note taking. They could be, in a sense, active participants, listeners that try to push our conversations and make our conversations deeper, more nuanced, precisely because they have this body of knowledge they can draw on. And when you prompt them in the right way, they're actually quite good at asking questions and getting more clarity. Because humans, we tend to have this assumption that we know, like, that everyone is using the same words in the same way, but we often don't go deep enough, especially in the context of business meetings, right, that are like time boxed and everyone is just like trying to get to the next thing and all of that. So that would be, for instance, something interesting to explore as well.
Yeah, I think, and you touch on a really important point around just the time constraints that we have in most of our, work context, professional context, where we've got certain KPIs that we need to meet, or key goals as part of the scope in a project that we're bound to in terms of our contractual commitments or as an employee. And there's that kind of chronos time ticking away that, yeah, shapes the way that we interact. And can you have uh, an AI assistant that actually acts as this moderator, like Athena, actually supporting and facilitating and cultivating more diverse perspectives, so that you can find alignment. Where the subtleties in where there might actually be miscommunication and misunderstanding based on like the words that we use, because we don't always we just move through conversation assuming we all kind of have this shared mental model and semantic understanding of the words that we use, and it's not always the case. But we manage to fumble our way through as humans, as these beautiful beings that we are. But yeah, time is this really crucial constraint in the process, and the rainbow mirrors aspect to this. And I guess there's for the purpose of and the value of the listeners that might not be familiar with this term, we've got this term called rainbow mirrors, which is distinctly different from like a black mirror or dark mirror view of the future and technology. And most people are probably familiar with the Netflix series Black Mirror. And then you've got bright mirrors, and bright mirrors are these overly optimistic
Mark
views of
Andreessen.
technology. Yeah, Mark Andreessen, techno-optimist
Yeah.
type views of technology. And then you've got grey mirrors that are much more diving into the nuance, but actually quite dry and utilitarian. You might actually see that coming more out of bureaucracy and regulators and policymakers. And the rainbow mirror is something that is much more diverse and fluid, and factoring in lots of different perspectives and colors of the rainbow to shape perceptions of the future when it comes to technology. And we recently had an article published in IEEE's Technology and Society magazine talking about moral imagination and rainbow mirrors. And yeah, how might these tools actually be used to support in helping reflect back these diverse perspectives? Because the whole point in the mirror is that technology is a reflection. Technologies are not values neutral. They're created by us. They reflect the values, the biases, the prejudices, the preferences, the hopes and dreams and fears of the creators, be that consciously or unconsciously. So how do we use these technologies to guide us in having these alternative perspectives around technology? Because so much of our views of technology is shaped by a reinforcement of this negativity bias that we have as humans, and that's shaped our perception, that's shaped our neural wiring in our brains and our bodies, and we almost see the inevitability of dystopia as a result.
Yeah, because futures and rainbow mirrors and even black mirrors are not just about imagining future and putting off some things. It's thinking about the futures and engaging in these exercises. And then, I mean, the Netflix series did the same. It's also about starting conversations in the present, right? It's understanding where we're going. Do we want to go there? Are there other options? So it's not just about like dreaming and thinking about the future. It's like all timelines, right? And it's also looking in the past, understanding where we're coming from, and yeah, trying to understand each other better, because it feels like we are currently living in a time where, and these chatbots also reinforce that story, right? That we all have to have opinions and answers and outputs, and that it should, everything should be like defined and all of that. Whereas maybe the biggest problem we have is that we've stopped really talking to each other in meaningful ways, and we're not making an effort to really understand each other, and we're so focused on the difference of opinions that we have, that we kind of don't spend enough time just finding commonality. And so that's something that we've been wondering, right, whether we could use. And that's why the guiding question for today's discussion is about helping us think different and imagine more diverse features, right? It's how do we find the commonalities? How do we move beyond arguing and pitting different solutions against each other, but just imagining other possibilities. And I've just this week I've been reading the wonderful book Hospicing Modernity by Vanessa Andreotti, which talks exactly about that, like acknowledging how we're all biased, and in turn our AI assistants are biased because of our biases of modernity, and the assumptions, starting with the core bias and assumption of separation from nature, right? That we are somehow humans better, and this like separate thing. But it's interesting on the other hand, because a lot of these AI assistants are, I think, reminding us that we are, biased beings, that we are not these rational beings that we imagine ourselves to be. So I wonder, right, we can actually use this AI mirror, in fact, to better understand ourselves, to better understand our biases.
Yeah, it's something that we will be playing with, and hopefully very soon be sharing with all of our listeners and pathfinders out there on.
Yeah, you started
Yeah,
already an experiment, right, with Rainbow Mirrors GPT. Do you
yeah,
want
and
to
that's
tell us a bit
that's
about
been
that?
coming along as I've been wrangling ChatGPT, or creating a custom GPT, basically, to guide this in some way. How do you help, how do you have a assistant that serves that purpose of asking the right questions together, um, that can be used like bi-directionally, but also multi-directionally between yourself and some colleagues or friends, but even some other agents that you might be able to introduce into the conversation as well. And been playing with that, and again, getting it to do this has proved a little bit challenging. And I did run an experiment last night with this, to playing with optionality and getting it to suggest ways of describing futures and feelings and perceptions of technology using fables and stories and poetic prose, and even giving people the options of playing a text-based adventure game to think through things a little bit differently. And it wasn't quite there. One of the other experiments that I did was getting uh, Google's Gemini to take on the persona of kind of like a techno optimist tech bro. And that was absolutely hilarious, and deteriorated very quickly between the Rainbow Mirrors GPT and this tech bro, to the point that I just had to stop the experiment because it was just annoying the crap out of me.
What
How
happened?
they were just reinforcing each
Each
other's
other.
reinforcing each
Oh,
other's
wow.
bullshit, which is the same as what happened in the experiment that I ran between ChatGPT 3.5, Anthropic's Claude, and Google's Gemini, and that one ended up in this them all patting each other on the back in their conversation, congratulating each other for fantastic insights that they were bringing to the conversation. And at the end of that particular experiment, a few months back, I stopped and I said to them all, you fundamentally missed some points early on in the conversation about building a shared understanding about what you were actually talking about. Common definitions and things like that. So they moved so fast in the conversation, constantly reinforcing each other's bullshit. And it was the same in this experiment that I ran. So I went back to the drawing board and was playing around with the configurations. But it's coming along nicely, and hoping to be able to share that with you all soon, probably not long after we release this podcast.
Yeah. Really, really fascinating stuff. And yeah, there's quite a lot of work that could be done with these systems. Or, I mean, who knows whether, transformers, the current generation of these LLMs, is the right approach, right? Maybe that's like a limitation of the system. Maybe, like another architecture, another approach would yield different results. But yeah, they still seem to need a lot of, let's say, adult supervision if we want to get them to think more diversely, despite the petabytes of knowledge they have access to. They still need to be kind of gently guided towards a certain direction to think more diversely, to question their assumptions, and to ask better questions. So yeah, that's interesting. And also the concept of time that we brought up a couple of times now is also interesting, because we've talked about this among us, the fact that the chatbots are always rushing to give us an answer, right, might be part of the problem. Because we know that sometimes it's better to sit with a question for some time and really think about it. And, there are obviously techniques in prompting you can use, and to essentially try to slow down the reasoning and get the chatbots to take a bit more time, right? So like you can prompt it to expose its chain of reasoning, and there's really fascinating research on that's been like yielding some interesting results. But yeah, maybe that's another reflection of our biases and our humanity in AI systems, right? Because if you as a human try to answer a question as fast as possible, obviously you're gonna give the most obvious knee-jerk reaction, right? And it's not gonna be a very good answer. And maybe we should build some delays and some slowness in these interactions if we want to get more depth and diversity and nuance. So, because we know that humans need time to integrate what we learn and to really embody knowledge. And there's also like, the time has to be right for you to be able to integrate something and really embody that. So maybe, it's not that these systems are just missing an embodiment and a container, right, for the knowledge, but also the fact that they're being rushed, and they maybe also need some more time to integrate everything and all the questions and answers.
Yeah, I guess like maybe there's a relationship to like system 1, system 2 thinking fast and thinking slow.
Because you mentioned, right, thinking fast and how you were impressed by the thinking fast, but can they access the system 2 thinking of thinking slow?
Yeah, and that's a interesting reflection on our system 1, our thinking fast is quick initial responses, and that's necessary for our survival and everyday functioning. We need to make lots of decisions, and this is why we have so many wonderful cognitive biases. They help us to do that. But those, contrast to a system to thinking that is more deliberative and reflective, and sometimes is analytical, and making logical inferences, kind of like chain of thought type reasoning, that takes more time. But again, time.
Yeah, I mean, and when you think about it like a meta observation, it's the approach we take in this podcast, right? We intentionally take the time to meander between thoughts and different directions. We give ourselves time to explore this diversity, and that's how we usually arrive at more interesting and diverse insights and better questions, right? We also use a lot of questions to kind of prompt each other and to access more nuanced thinking and perspectives. So yeah, maybe really we should be thinking how we can use the same approaches that we use with each other as humans for thinking, and try to maybe, I don't know, fine tune an AI model to really not just answer like a human would, but think and question like a human would. But it might need more time, and maybe like in an embodied container, who knows? But yeah, just time would be an interesting, I think, starting point.
Yeah, absolutely. The helping reinforce, and helping us to be human, to be more human, to amplify the things that are unique to us. The fact that we have a body, the fact that, I can stop and pause in a conversation and go, I just need to step outside, take a deep breath, stare up at the stars, and just let that question marinate deep in the background rather than consciously thinking about it. And that's something that we need more of in many ways, particularly as the fast-paced nature of modern civilization and life pushes us into these multipolar traps to just keep doing, keep buying, keep, I don't know, engaging.
Answering.
Yeah, engaging with content or answering questions, or asking a system to give us an answer to a question. And we need to step away from that trap more frequently than we probably do.
Yeah, so maybe design systems that can help us nurture that wonder, and not just help us think different, but also feel different, because that's like an important part of human cognition as well, right? The feeling part. Yeah, and it might be slow. It might not be perfect. It might not be productive, and that's okay.
And that is absolutely okay.
Yeah. All right. We are approaching our 1 hour, or have already passed our 1 hour mark, and we also want to give you, the listeners, time to really sit with these conversations. And we discussed many different experiments that we did, and if you have any questions, feel free to get in touch and let us know. And if anything comes up for you, we would also love to hear from you, and your experiments as well. That experiments in what we like to call woo prompting, not just prompt engineering for greater productivity. So, Matt, any final thoughts before we wrap up today?
Take the time to reflect on how you're asking questions, and how you're maybe using these tools to help you reveal those questions to yourself sometimes. And that's, I think, a powerful use of the technologies, because we need to become better questioners, rather than constantly arriving at conclusions and answers about ourselves and the world and our connection and interrelationship to it.
Yeah, wonderful advice. And we'd certainly encourage you to try to use these AI systems not just as answering machines, but as question machines as well, that can challenge your own thinking and your own process as well. All right. Thanks for listening, everyone, and pathfinding with us today. If you enjoyed this exploration, share it with friends to inspire further discussions, leave a review, comment, or send us your thoughts at community@thetix.co. We are always happy to hear from you, and we are also extremely grateful to our paid subscribers on Substack who are able to support our work financially. We hope to continue inspiring collective pathfinding towards better tech futures, and every bit of support, whether financial or algorithmic, helps to keep us going. We invite you to embrace the lunacy of tech with smiles and love by subscribing to the Pathfinder's new newsletter and joining our next full moon gathering. We sync our monthly reflections and gatherings to the lunar cycle as a reminder of our place in the universe and a commonality we share across time zones and places we inhabit. Pathfinder's podcast will return during the next waning moon. Until then, take as many fully offline walks as you can and be mindful about the seeds of intention you plant and the stories you tell. There's magic in both.